All right. Good morning to all of you. You know, there's an old saying that says, if you want to learn, teach. One of my favorite people that I'm going to quote later on was once asked, what is your one secret in life? And he says, the fact that I love giving away. Because by giving, do you realize that from an anthropological point of view, it's impossible to give like this? I cannot give like this. I cannot give by holding on. What do I need to do? I need to open my hand. Do you know that in ancient times, by opening the hand, it's actually a sign of weakness? Because you're showing a very weak part of your body, the inside of your palm. So I'm here literally saying I'm opening my palms to you, and by teaching, I'm learning. So I would like to really work on the premise that you're going to ask a lot of questions. You're going to make the things that we're going to discuss applicable to your work life. I'm particularly impressed by the fact that this is not necessarily a room full of only senior leaders. This is a room that is comprising of, I would like to call it entry-level, younger, junior leaders, without referring to any hierarchy. Krista asked me to say something about Consulta. As a matter of fact, Krista's wrong. I have 4 children. The one is Consulta. But not seeing it as a child. But I can tell you that sometimes I do equate. I'm a male, so I cannot really speak about, you know, giving birth to a baby. But I can equate to that, you know, because by starting an own business, it is really hard. It's hard. And to sustain it is even harder. But I'm going to share with you today some of the learnings over the years, some of the things that I've done with almost a blind faith and believing that the things that you stand on, the values and the foundations that you stand on, if you do it right, there's a higher probability that it would work. Now, the moment that I'm talking about a higher probability, you know, what is the definition of a fool? It's someone that just goes blindly into the future without determining whether there is a chance that this would work. But there's also a degree of you need to be bold enough to be an explorer. And that means that you should not have fear. Now, I promise you, I've many times had some discussions with Krista. Fear gets hold of you. It's a bad thing. So I'm going to talk about these things, blend them into the topic in terms of leadership and management, and going to share with you some learnings of that. This is not only my work. Being a scholar and currently an extraordinary professor, I don't teach anymore, but something in my life that I do really value is the fact that I've had a very long learning cycle. Because literally until 1999, towards 2000, I was in academia. I was a theorist. I was a philosopher. I was a professor of marketing, and I specialized in market research and customer satisfaction. But I started the business literally the second day after I started at university. And it's purely because I looked at the appointment contract. And then I realized I made a massive mistake, because this is a contract of everlasting poverty. Because at academia, you will not actually really, progress in life with regards to wealth creation. But luckily, it is a system that one can actually utilize to then expand your knowledge and so on. So in 2000, I made the jump, and I've jumped out of university, and I started Consulta in the current format. I'm literally almost a stone throw from here. If I look far enough, we're in Highveld Techno Park, there where that structure, that pyramid structure is our offices, the old Spoor and Fisher offices. Consulta is a company that specializes in customer centricity. We make organizations like you more customer-centric and customer-focused. Now, believe me one thing. It is easy to say we are customer-led and we are customer-focused. But we've often seen that there's a massive paradox. As a matter of fact, there's a tension in organizations between shareholder goals and customer goals. What shareholders stand for is profit. What customers stand for, they don't care about profit. As a matter of fact, they only care about you making enough profit to sustain yourself so that I still can get the fantastic products that you deliver to me and the services that you deliver to me. And that's pretty much what we do. I love every day that I go to work. It is one of those things that I look forward to doing. It is also an excitement to the degree that every day is different, because customers are really an exciting part of business. So let's start off with what I'm going to share with you today. I titled the talk Leadership Management Paradox, but I've added the word or polarity. Now, for now, if these are words and terminologies that might be new to you, don't worry too much. I'm going to take you through this. I love the new. As a matter of fact, if this was an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, I would say, hi, I'm Adre. I must actually just admit that last night I delved into some new knowledge again, because I'm addicted to it. I'm absolutely addicted to learning new stuff. And therefore, I'm going to try to bring you the newest of the new. But also, I love things that sometimes is just looking into the face of conventional wisdom and saying, I don't agree. I think we should challenge this. I think we should turn it on its head and just test whether it's still applicable. And that I'm going to do. All right, so if I do step on toes, it is well intended to actually just turn that paradox and face that conventional wisdom in the face and say, can we still assume that you are actually true in the day and age that we live in? All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to very briefly take you through what I believe is about 5 quotes from people that's really contributed massively to what I believe, modern day leadership is all about. And it's not necessarily only one model. And it comes from surprising different angles. Then I'm going to open up the whole leadership management paradox, and I'm going to show you 2 directly opposing views of business life. So start off with this guy, Marshall Goldsmith. Now, Marshall is the guy that I quoted that says, what is your secret? And he says, I love to give. I love to give away. As a matter of fact, if you go onto this guy's website, none of his work is actually protected on copyright. Yes, he's written 23 books, obviously that you need to buy. But none of his work, his slides, his packs that he does, he actually protects behind bars, because the belief is the more that I can actually provide it to people, the more what I share can be used. He's also a leadership coach, and he said something very interesting. He says that his fee model works on this. If there's change, you pay me. If there's no change, you don't pay me. And he realized something, that he spent an incredible amount of time on one of the CEOs that he coached. And it didn't work. It didn't got pay. Then he spent a little amount of time on a group, and 200 people changed, and he got paid. And he drew a little graph, and he says, something's wrong here. And maybe I'm the wrong here, because he's just a facilitator. He is not the answer. And I think that is that humility that Krista talks about, that is an uncanny characteristic of modern day leadership that I would like to share with you. So Marshall Goldsmith says the one question every servant leader should ask. Have a look at this. He says the next time you run into a conflict. Now, life is conflict. There's many conflicts. Business is conflict. You do disagree. Look at what's happening in super sport right now. That's practically a disagreement. Doesn't matter whether there's anything currently untowards. There's a disagreement in opinion. How do you solve that conflict? I can tell you one thing, being an early conflict avoider in my life, is you have to face it. You cannot put it away and think that it's going to go away. it is going to come back with a vengeance. So therefore he says the following: am I willing, as a leader, at this time to make the investment required to make a positive difference on this topic? Now, this is not ego speaking. This is not my way of belief and trying to convince you that my way is the right way. Right, so in terms of Marshall Goldsmith's work, he says, like closing out our office doors so people hesitate before they knock, asking ourselves this question: give us a thin barrier of breathing room, time enough to inhale, exhale, and reflect on whether the outcome we seek is truly positive. So when you go into a conflict scenario, are we going to at least have the possibility that there's a positive outcome? And if you allow that, there's a switch that happens in your head that immediately makes a possibility a real possibility. That's the one contribution, modern day thinking about servant leadership. This guy is a very, very interesting, it's a professor in the United States, Ras Sisodia, and he talks about the concept of a selfless leader. A leader that is a sacrificial leader that would actually put himself in front of danger. Now, you know, that sounds very hero, and it sounds very Hollywood. But what does it really mean? He says here, on being a selfless leader, a leader who operates with a primary emphasis on self-interest naturally views other people's as a means to an end. I can tell you without mentioning names, I've come across people in my business experience that are literally what I call career ladder climbers. And you know what their ladders are? Stepping on other people. They just see people as a means to climb the ladder, to advance in their careers. And they don't care about who they leave behind. All the corpses and all the damage and all the bad things that they leave about. You cannot be a true leader. It's a very strong statement. You cannot be a true leader if you operate at that level of consciousness. Now, it's interesting. He talks about a thing that's consciousness. Now, as a philosopher, I dabble into these things. And I must tell you, that is the most difficult concept for me. You know, I would rather go and study nuclear physics. But consciousness is a massively difficult thing. And consciousness is the only one differentiator, I think, that our humans have different to that of animals, is that we have a consciousness. And the degree to which you don't have any conscious, and you actually step on people, can you really be called a leader? And you know what? Unfortunately, if you go, and I've taught on many Masters of Business Administration programs, MBA grad programs, if you look at the mainstream textbooks and the curricula, it is still very much a leader-led, instructive type of model. I tell you what to do, have you already done it? So selfless does not mean eradicating the ego. That's nearly impossible. It's about harnessing the ego in healthy ways. And he's actually a fantastic website that talks about conscious capitalism. I would like you to go there later on and have a specific look at what he calls conscious leadership and what conscious leadership really means. In a day and age of Tegeta, McKinsey's, Steinhoff, what are we seeing coming up and starting to happen? Is that there's top leaders that's got serious feet of clay that would actually fall for the prey of greed and eventually to the detriment of many people. In Steinhoff, how many people would potentially lose their jobs? Let's take another company. Who's Cambridge Analytica? Do you follow the Facebook scandal? Cambridge Analytica is the company that bought millions of personal data on Facebook, and they've literally influenced propaganda to the degree that they influence vote in the American election. Cambridge Analytica last week filed for bankruptcy in America because they were discovered. So conscious leadership is a very important thing for me. Then we're going to talk very briefly about Robert Greenleaf. He's expanding a little bit on it. What I love, what he's saying, is that conscious leadership focus on we rather than me. Guys, do you realize that it's actually unnatural for us to think more than me? because we're made to self-preserve. What is the most basic need of Maslow? Is self-preservation. I need to survive. There's a bear, I need to run. Otherwise he's going to eat me. You're not going to say, hey bear, let's think of we. No. I'm going to think of me and run. Or look for a tree. So it is actually unnatural, but that's where the world is moving towards. Last one that I would like to share with you, and I've had the privilege of meeting Stephen M.R. Covey. This is the younger of the Stephen Covey clan, if I can call it that. We are now doing business together. Fantastic man. The insight of this person, I spent a day in his presence, and it's just absolutely immense in terms of the types of learning that is there. What is interesting about this is that Stephen M.R. Covey does not actually attribute his success to the formidable name of his father being Stephen Covey, 7 Habits author. He doesn't need to stand in that shadow. He's actually made a success of the Covey, let's call it business enterprise, a massive success. And he's all, amongst others, I think famous for the book Speed of Trust. Now, if there's ever a good investment that you can make, it is looking into this. Guys, we all easily throw around the word trust. Very easy. But let me tell you that trust from a leadership perspective is a very scary thing. Because later on, I'm going to say to you, leadership is about giving control away, not holding on to control. Now, as a young leader, I can remember, and still today, I believe that most leaders suffer from the biggest challenge in their leadership career is about delegation. How do I delegate? And what is delegation saying? I'm giving control away. I'm asking others to do stuff for me, for us. All right, and that's pretty much the basic layman's definition of trust. So a positional leader seeks to control. So you, by way of a position, and you seek control. I can remember, I used to grow up literally in the army days when we had to do military training in South Africa. And I already had my master's degree, and then I went to the army. So here I was, a 23-year-old, so I'm older in life, but 23-year-olds is still not really old. But then I had to listen to an 18-year-old Lance Corporal that tells me, do you see that tree on the hill? Run. Are you back already? And I had to obey because he had a stripe and I didn't. And I started developing a little bit of a feeling that I do not respect this person based on the fact that he's actually abusing his rank. If he would have told me, why do I need to run? And he would motivate me, I would probably have run twice as fast. Do you see the difference where I'm going with this? So positional leader is the rank or the pip. Whereas a servant leader seeks to unleash talent and creativity by extending trust to others. Krista can remember this, but my why is defined as what I call when there's a light going up in people that I'm involved with. So if I turn around and I've left something behind, there's a little bit of legacy that I could leave behind. So today, I must tell you that I'm actually much more privileged than any of you by speaking here. Because I get so much by hoping that maybe 1 or 2 people will take something from this and say, maybe this had an effect on my leadership career, and I can remember that. That's enough. That's absolutely enough. And I'm going to talk about this guy, Stephen Covey. This comes from his website that says, how is trust impacting on my organization right now? Do you realize that the current research tells us that trust is really almost compared to cancer? If there's lack of trust, it's almost impossible for an organization to achieve its goals. There's empirical evidence that says trusting companies achieve extraordinarily better results than mediocre trust companies. And it's becoming more and more prevalent. I've recently started working with Deloitte in Australia because in the financial services world, they have actually skipped the whole regulation part of treating customers fairly. They jumped right to trust. Can I trust my bank? Let me quickly ask you in the room, just be honest. How many of you truly trust your bank? Just by show of hands. Guys, this is a minority, trusting the big banks out there. Do you know that banks controlling a significant proportion of an economy? But that's unfortunately a reality. I work with these guys every day, and maybe that's the reason why there's only 3 people that trust them. It's because I just don't see that degree of change. I started working with the World Bank in eradicating the poor, the issues around the poor in Africa, in Korea, in Philippines, in Venezuela, and so on. I work on a program called CGAP, Closing the Gap of the Poor. And what is interesting is they discovered that digital financial services, that's basically M-Pesa, you transfer money through a mobile phone, has grown faster and quicker than any other business concept ever in the world. And you know what? It's mobile operators. I talk to these digital financial services guys and I say to them, so why don't you have any banks backing you? They say, because their paradigm is so stuck that it will be a failure if we do that. Rather create something totally new. Cryptocurrency coming in. There's all sorts of new things that says we face the conventional wisdom and we challenge it. Right, this is what Stephen Covey says. I'm very proud to say that Consulta contributed to that. You would say to me, but Adre, is it possible? I can tell you that it's possible to measure your trust. The organization can measure its trust on an index, and you can get an indication, a temperature gauge on what is the trust on different levels within the organization and in the different components of the organization. You'll see this is the piece of work that we've done, so we've got international recognition for it. Here Stephen Covey is actually talking about this in this quick little video.
So, as a multiplier, as an accelerator, as an energizer, trust is the one thing that changes everything. You get good at trust, it'll make you better at everything else that you need to do.
Right, so there you are. It's something that we can already do. We dream about this trust index that would become something that would be probably even more important than the Standard & Poor's index and the Moody's index. Because here's the fascinating thing. Trusting countries where the citizens trust their government more are more wealthy. Their GDP is higher, their growth rate is higher, their happiness is higher, their businesses are more successful. Now, this is fascinating. So there's something that we need to really start understanding about trust. So we're going to talk about this. This is a favorite author of mine, Simon Sinek, the author of Start With Why. A fascinating book. If there's ever one good investment in terms of reading that you can make to yourself, do this. Buy this book and read it. Or if you're not the reader type and you're more the audiobook, download the audiobook. It's available on Amazon Kindle. And read it or listen to it. He says the following on the culture of vulnerability, and he's not necessarily coined as being the, let's call it the credible source or the guy that started talking about vulnerability first, but he started understanding vulnerability within the context of why and trust and everything. He says the following: creating a space in which people can feel vulnerable means a person can walk into their boss's office, admit that they made a mistake without fear of losing their job. On Sunday afternoon, one of my staff members phoned me earlier that afternoon and said, Adre, can I come and see you urgently? Now, whenever that happens, for a CEO of a company, you start to say, well, let me just check if the servers are still working. Let me just check the bank account, whether that's been cleaned out. So you start really stressing. So when the guy arrived, he literally started crying like a baby. And he says, I must admit that I cannot go on with this. It will not work. It's a risk for your company. Guess what we did? Did we fire him? No, because he did nothing wrong. He did everything in his power for the company, But he had one thing that I think stands out that I actually really deem above everything else. He had the bravery, the degree to which he's brave enough to come forward and say, I cannot do it anymore. And we turned it around Monday morning, 8 o'clock yesterday. We took the decision. We ended that particular project and we said, put it on the shelf. It's maybe too premature right now. I saw him going home last night. I wish you could have seen this guy's face. He was a different person. It's as if there was 10 tons off his shoulders. Can you imagine the stress and the angst and the anxiety and the fear that he must have been living with in the last couple of weeks? And that's all about this component that Simon talks about. But there's a bit of a paradox, and I've spoken to Krista about this as well, and that is the problem. It seems like this, I need to wiggle this a little bit. The problem is that in management hierarchies, the following happens. You do great work, then they make you a manager. Then they say to you, stop doing what you've been doing, now you need to do something different. Guys, there's something wrong here. There's something horribly wrong in that thinking. As a matter of fact, we've coined a term like that. We called it the Peter principle. You promote people to the level of incompetency. Because they're not competent to be a manager, they've shown competency in their technical capabilities of doing the job. And I challenge that wisdom.
Really what we have to do is go through a transition. Some people make it quickly, some people make it slowly, and unfortunately some people will never make that transition at all. Which is we have to go through this transition of being responsible for the job and then turning into somebody who's now responsible for the people who are responsible for the job. And as I said before, one of the great things that is lacking in most of our companies is that they are not teaching us how to lead. And leadership is a skill like any other. It is a practicable, learnable skill.
All right. We're going to look at management and leadership quickly as a paradox. And this is the introduction of what Simon Sinek has actually just said to us. Have a look at currently, this is mainstream textbook stuff in Masters of Business Administration. You go to businesses and you ask them, what is a manager all about to do? This comes from almost like the procedural handbook, the standard operating procedure, the policy document from what managers are supposed to do. A focus on maintaining stability and control to achieve order and predictability. Managers want to predict. We want to know whether we're going to make a profit or not, whether we're going to grow or not. And they have all these control mechanisms and KPIs and information. Why? Because of that. Second point is a focus on systems. How many times do you use the word systems and processes and models and structures to deal with complexity? Third one is leverages controls to influence outcomes. So they believe that if I can pull the lever here, I can then influence the outcome. That's what a manager thinks. Not necessarily wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I want you to see to which this common wisdom is currently in the business. Define strategy and tactics to achieve a goal. Nothing wrong with that. We go on these strategic planning sessions, we define the tactic, we define the goals, and then we actually allocate responsibility, deadlines, we check the progress. That's how business is done. Establishes direction through planning and budgeting. We budget because we've planned. And then you need to then afford the resources that was given to you by achieving the necessary outcomes, of delivering the necessary outcomes. Organizes resources, budgets, processes, roles, and responsibilities. Does that sound like business? Very much like that. Measures and governs progress. You know what? I believe that we live in an age which I call measure mania. We measure ourselves to death and we're none the wiser. There's actually an acronym for that. It's DRIP, D-R-I-P. It stands for data rich, insights poor. With the advent of the information age and the internet, we have more information available than ever before in history. Do you realize that in terms of wisdom and insights, we are now none the wiser? As a matter of fact, it makes matters worse. It makes you blind because there's just too much. creates alignment by organizing resources, controlling, creating boundaries, and establishes authority as the foundation of relationships. So, and processes and controls, I spoke about that. So let's quickly go and listen to how Simon Sinek have actually experienced this. And maybe you had a similar experience in your younger managerial life in terms of progressing through organizations. What it means how not to manage people.
Strangely enough, I learned how not to manage people. My first job out of college, I had a boss who believed it was appropriate to berate people to get the most out of them. And I remember, this is a true story, I actually sat down with her. We used to have these sort of monthly career updates, you know, and she literally said to me, "You have no talent," quote unquote. And I went, "None?" And she said, "None," you know, and the good news was I thought that was funny.
Guess what happens now? This is a young employee. His model of management is a berating manager that says to him, "You have no talent." What will he do to survive? What will he do? Guess. He will? You should leave, but you know, if you're a young guy, got responsibilities, you know, got a car, got a sound system, that's typically what young people have. He will mimic what he sees around him. We are great apes mimicking each other. Really, that's what we do, all right? But we shouldn't, you're quite right. So let's see what he talks about. This is actually quite funny.
Better than telling them they have no talent. She had this belief that if you don't look harried and insane, then you're not working hard. You know, so I remember pretending that I was like stressed out, because if I sauntered down the hallway and said hi to people, she thought I was doing nothing. Right? So I started pretending, it's like, I can't talk, and that way.
Do you recognize that?
Yeah, honesty in management, you know, treating people with respect, being honest about what they can and can't do, and committing yourself to helping people, not hurting people or pushing them down, has been.
Okay, so first of all, I'm sharing with you about management is rather learn how not to manage people. You know, because there's many examples of how not to do it. And most certainly it's not the berating, you know, the Harriet, and there's this sort of model. That is still very much a prevailing belief in many businesses. So let's look at the value of leadership. Now, the moment that I'm putting leadership against management, you will see that I'm almost painting two different opposites. All right? So have a look at this. It says a focus on development of people. It starts off with people. It starts off with the soft stuff, not the hard stuff. Not the controls and the budgets and the systems and the processes. Development of people to achieve a vision and a purpose. This is like bunny huggers, you know, tree huggers. This is soft stuff, grey woolly stuff. Concerned with purpose and meaning. They're philosophers. They dream. That's what leaders are. Create a culture in support of their vision and goal. So they talk a lot about culture, and we need to change our culture. We need to align with the vision and the goals. They talk about establishing direction through the vision and purpose. So I'm just going to give you direction. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Inspire change. Most servant leaders are very inspirational leaders. I've got a little saying that most leaders are readers. You need to read a lot. And you know what? I'm maybe I'm getting on the wrong side of that age, where you start saying these things, is that the younger generation don't read, they look. They look at pictures, they don't read. You know what, we've done a study for the Department of Education 3 years ago. South Africa came second last in the world in terms of our reading capability. And we were testing primary school kids. Second last in the world. Our education system is broken in a bad way. Because if we don't teach our kids to read, it's not working. Luckily, there's some programs and there's some progress, so let's be positive. Challenges the status quo, an existing way of doing things. What did I tell you? I love challenging the status quo. I love challenging the prevailing paradigm, the conventional wisdom. creates alignment through culture. So there's, again, culture is there. Establishes trust as the foundation of relationships. Trust is there. Leaders' relationships with people is based on personal power. So it's more a personal relationship than positional power. I tell you because I'm the boss. I'm the manager. So let's look at just a short clip. This is a longish video. This is the same Simon Sinek, and I chose to show 2 videos of him where he's now talking a little bit more about leadership. And he's talking to armed forces. This is done at the Armed Forces Communication and Electronics Association. So this is talking to the army, one-liner corporals that says, run, I want a leaf on that tree on the hill. That management paradox is in the extreme positional. All right? It is not leadership-led.
And on one side of the cafeteria tables were volunteers handing out bagels. There were boxes of bagels on the tables, and then a long line of runners waiting to be given their free bagel. So I said to my friend, let's get a free bagel. And he says, nah man, I don't want to stand in the line. And I said, free bagels? He's like, nah, I don't want to stand in the line. I was like, free bagels. And that's when I realized there's 2 kinds of people in this world. There are people who see the thing they want, and there are people who see the thing that's preventing them from getting the thing they want.
Okay, so I'm going to leave you there because it's an introduction to a new way of thinking about leadership. So again, urge you to go and watch the rest of the video. It's not the typical long list of characteristics of leadership. So it's an opportunist. They see opportunity. They see this is where we need to go. Typically the visionary leaders, they lead not by telling, but they would walk in front. And in a military sense, what typically would happen, you go and look at these Hollywood movies, where would the leaders and the generals stand? Up on a hill, far away from the fight. Whereas this says, I'm right in front. I'm charging ahead. It's a whole different view. That's a different view of this. This comes from a group that does a lot of training in this, and it's all about this fight between management and leadership. And I'm going to introduce this apparent, let's call it paradox, and a bit of stress between it, and it's called polarity. But if I can leave you with something that is, I personally use, that Krista have lived through a couple of sessions that we've had to go through where I had to face some serious challenges in my life. Because when you're a trusting person, in the extreme, the disappointment in the break of trust is extreme. How do you unravel that break of trust? I found these 3P process to be a very, very helpful approach. And understanding that if you look at a conflict or any challenge in life and try to identify, is this a problem? Is this a principle? Or is this a polarity? And it sounds fairly easy until you start practicing it. And I can tell you from personal experience that most people treat polarities as a problem. It's where there's differences of opinion. And therefore, if we treat it as a problem, I need to solve it. And in a solving scenario, X equals Y plus A plus B plus C, there's winners and there's losers. Because that's how mathematics works. Right, so problems must be solved. You can't fix it. Right, you solve it because it's like a mathematical formula. Whereas a principle is a game breaker. I always say that if this conflict is about you've actually broken a value of honesty and integrity, how can I trust you again? That is a game breaker. Principles must be adhered to. But then comes the very difficult one, which they call is the polarity. Polarities must be managed. I want to scratch it out and say polarities must be led and must be understood, identified quickly. Otherwise, it will be managed. And you know what we do is we treat the polarity as a problem. And what do? We define a rule. We define another policy. All right? So we're going to check the music one just now and see what sort of solution we get on this. So Sir Paul Callaghan is one of the authors on polarities. He says the following, it's a fantastic quote here. The nature of paradox, turning things on their head, flipping ideas upside down, and knowing how to reconcile and right the tension of opposites is at the heart of leadership. And he adds an ending off by saying, indeed, life. So this whole notion of challenging conventional wisdom is not because you try to be funny, or you that you convey yourself as better than others. As a matter of fact, it's a very humble process, because believe me, you can very easily be wrong, and there's a universal truth that's still there. But guys, even in my own faith, I challenge very universal truths, because I was grown up. I'd grown up in a sort of society that says children are not supposed to ask those questions. Forbidden to ask that question. I refuse to accept it. Because why did I receive a brain to argue about these things, to think about these things, to philosophize about these things? And that's what he's saying here. All right, so let's move on. The polarity test, very easy test, the black and white test. Ask the first question, is the difficulty ongoing? Do you have ongoing difficulties in AFGRI? So maybe 50% chance that it's a polarity. Are the two poles interdependent? Can they live side by side and coexist? No reason for win or lose. This is what Stephen Covey, in his very last book ever, Krista can remember, I swallowed up this book. It's called The Third Alternative, and he talks about synergy. He says that synergy is about making win-win scenarios. How do you then get a win-win scenario other than treating a polarity as a true polarity? If you treat it as a win-lose scenario, one is going to lose, one is going to win. All right, so here's leadership and here's management. Now, I obviously you see to which sort of style of thinking I lean towards. But I often ask people which one is the more effective in businesses. And then I get a split vote. Some people say you need the discipline of management because that will ensure that we make our goals. But you need visionary leadership to actually make sure that we innovate and sustain. And it's as if people are a little bit in a paradox and a bit of a challenge in here. So characteristics of polarity is that it's ongoing, there's no end point, it cannot be solved with a specific plan. So as a matter of fact, you cannot plan to solve a polarity. You need to manage and live with a polarity by accepting that. Interdependent alternatives cannot stand alone. Alternatives need each other to optimize the solution. Let me ask you quickly here. If I give you a choice between which is better, breathing in, sucking in oxygen, or breathing out, which one is better for you? Which one do you love doing more? Breathing in. Okay, I will actually let you try that. Let's all breathe in. Now, I have to speak. I'm not going to cheat. But you're not allowed to exhale. Please exhale, otherwise I'm going to be in a health risk, because you might run a health risk if you keep on doing it. What happens if you just inhale? Your body, the biology, produces carbon dioxide. If you don't exhale, carbon dioxide is a poison. You need to give it to the world because the trees need it to grow. That's a classic polarity. Breathing in, breathing out. None more important than the other. Let's talk management and leadership. When you treat a polarity as a problem, and this is important, it always, not sometimes, create the problem of winners and losers. Always. Because what we do is we start creating rules, and because we have rules, we need to have more rules, and therefore we need to have a rule book, and a policy, and a disciplinary procedure, and there we go. Modern business. Okay. If it is a polarity you must manage, applying traditional problem-solving skills will increase the problem. So here we have, Houston, we have a problem here. The problem is called a polarity, and please don't treat it as a problem. Because if you treat it as a problem, we are creating a problem. Does it sound, mad in how I convey it? But it's exactly how it works. All right, so this is exciting stuff for me. Polarity management can help with, listen to this, simplify the complexity without being simplistic. I created my own little saying that says, the destiny of simplicity leads through the woods of complexity. Does it make sense? Sometimes you have to be complex to be simple, and sometimes you have to be simple to be complex. Complexity and simplicity is a classic polarity. All right. Capitalize on diversity without alienating the diverse groups. That's where this country is. We're in a scenario where we say we need to understand that people are different, and therefore we can live and cohabit because there's none that's better or worse or stronger or faster or cleverer or whatever you want to call it. Provide predictability and stability. I can predict and I can have stability. And I can have resistance to change and I can have sustainability. So there are many of these polarities. Sorry. We fear losing the things that we value most. Do you realize that? They say that in business, the moment that people will truly discover the value is when you switch it off. When you cut it off. When you stop doing it. One of my great authors in life is Peter Senge, that wrote the famous book, The Fifth Discipline. He says that we must unlearn the past. Unlearn the past. And the fear of doing it is because we love holding on to the past. Why is that? Have you ever wondered why do we love holding on to the past? You can't be wrong here.
Excuses for where you currently are, because you can go back and say, I'm here because of what happened in the past.
Exactly. Exactly. But you know what? There's an interesting phenomena about our physical universe. Did you realize the following? That the past is perfect science. Hindsight is perfect science. Because nobody would argue, did it happen? Yes, it did. You know exactly what happened. You have perfect knowledge about it. Can you do anything about it? Can you change it? Impossible. Until Einstein's theories, and still theories, that you can go back in time and create all sorts of granddad issues and whatever else. But you cannot change the past. But here's an interesting thing about the future. Do anyone really truly say that they know what will happen tomorrow? We don't know what will happen tomorrow. So we have imperfect knowledge of the future. Can we change tomorrow? Yes, we can. Here we sit with a classical polarity. The history and the future. They need to live side by side. And what is the space in between? Called now. It's the now. Where does change happen? Not to necessarily forgo the past and to move on to the future. Change happens in the now. And this is an interesting fact. I'm going to end up later on with that. Work towards the upsides of both values and you create a virtuous cycle leading to a higher purpose. When you overemphasize one value over another to neglect its pair, you will get, following the downsides of the chosen value, a vicious cycle that will take you downwards. We tend to make other individuals or group containers. We love, and that's what I, and it's painful for me to actually watch this on the Twitter and the social media about the super sport thing. What immediately people did, they didn't care about the facts. Immediately they side with their like. That's stereotyping. As a matter of fact, what you're doing, you're putting people again in a box. You're saying because you're white, therefore you're a racist. Because you're black, you are going to harp on racism. You see what I'm saying? Whereas, let's just go and look at the facts. Let's just go through the process. There are two truths in every polarity. Neither of them are actually true, or the whole truth. All values come in pairs. All value pairs are interdependent. Solving problems and leveraging polarities are both critical skills, and we are not taught how to do that. Have you sat through a class or a training course that teaches you how to do that, solving problems and leveraging polarities? I started training my staff on leveraging polarities, of managing polarities. The first thing I had to do is I had to teach them how to quickly identify a polarity. Because the quicker you identify the polarity, the quicker you can start managing it as a polarity, instead of treating it as a problem, and then they create rules for it. Never stop at balance when leveraging polarities. Always go for optimization. It's never a balance. It's an optimization. It's not a play of words. Let me show you how a management and a leadership polarity is actually done. This is a real-life example that we've done, and it starts off with a process. The first one is recognize the value of leadership and management. So we're not going to stand in a scenario that anyone is more important than any others. One of the strategic planning sessions I've planned one year, very deliberate, a bit sneaky, I would say. I printed lanyards, but with very big cards. And I printed the name fairly small, but I printed the title in double bold, like a 48th font. And the people looked at this and, I'm a senior manager. There it is, lanyard. And I started the strategic planning session, and I said to them, there's something wrong here. I said, what's wrong? I said, no, because you're acting from a positional leadership point of view. Because I'm the senior manager, and therefore if I speak with this authority. So what I said to the guys, okay, now we go outside and we get rid of all those lanyards, and we literally dumped it into the dustbin. And we got positional naked. No positions there, no managerial levels. We're all equals. We want to discuss, we want to engage. And that's pretty much what this is all about. So the first step is recognize the value of leadership. And it basically says the upside there, the upside there. Then you allow the managerial supporters to say what is the downside of management. And I'm going to open it up a little bit bigger, as we did with the music, and the downside of leadership. Have a look at how it actually came out. Okay, I'm going to start off. Leadership is about change. It requires challenging the status quo and to bring about a new future vision to ensure growth, innovation, and development in absolute clarity. It defines the why. Nothing wrong there. Everyone agreed that is the upside of leadership. But can you already intuitively feel that if we only do that, we're in trouble? We're going to get to that just now. Then management is about stability and order. We've read about that, we've seen it. It's about putting plans in place, processes, controls, monitor systems, metrics, ultimate effectiveness, efficiency. It's about the what and the how we do things. But can you see that if we just do the what and how and not understanding the why, as one of the great books in Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, he says, there's a story of two stonemasons. The one stonemason, when he walked up to him, he said to him, what are you doing? He says, it's back-breaking work. I've been working all my life, and but I'm earning a good keep whilst I'm building, being a stonemason in this building of the cathedral. And he got to the other stonemason. He said to him, what are you doing? He says, it's back-breaking work, and it's really hard, but I'm building a cathedral. What's the difference between the two? The one understands the why, the other one understands the what and the how. All right? So the managerial part is the what and the how, which is extremely important. Otherwise, people will just be fools and running around like madness, and it would be chaos. So the downside of leadership is the following. Leadership without management is disconnected and idealistic. It is fuzzy, it's all over in the air. It's la-la land. It is because if you lead without managing, you don't know what's going on. You lose touch with reality, lack of implementation, accountability, action, and buying. As a matter of fact, leadership without management, and here comes the shock, always leads to distrust. That is one of the biggest and the most dearest lessons I had to learn. Leadership without the discipline of good management principles leads to distrust. Why? Because of that. You don't know what's going on. If you don't know what's going on, I look into the future. It's unknown. And people intuitively then therefore distrust it. On the other side, management without leadership is disheartening. Just do it. Don't ask why, just do it. I want you to do it already yesterday. It's disheartening. There's no motivation behind it. It is disencouraging, it's disempowering, lacking motivation, constraining innovation, non-people oriented, without vision. You know what is interesting? If we then substitute the one for the other, what is the higher purpose of achieving both a leadership and management polarity? It's what we defined on this side to be a dynamic, leading, and competitive company, whereas this side, it's a conservative follower and downward spiral company that is actually on a slow death. All right, this is actually fearful stuff. As a matter of fact, I believe that that is definitely the answer for our problems. Okay, so this has actually been said in another book from Jim Collins. He calls it, and I love this particular approach, he calls it the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or. We live in a society that we always, do you realize that in African culture, the true African native language, there is no equivalent for the word but. It's because of the principle of Ubuntu. We think together. There's a Sotho principle. You guys that Sotho speaking, Ubuntu. Who's the Sotho speakers here? That talks about I am because we are and therefore I am. It's the principle of collective thinking. It's not an opposing or. One of the things when I facilitate in coaching conflict handling is try to do that next time you have a little bit of a fight with the opposite part of the family. You're not allowed to use the word but. Is there a causa equivalent? Nkodwa. Okay, then maybe my sources are wrong. But it's culturally, framed in the principle that it's not because of it's an opposing way. It's looking for an answer. All right, so it means that the genius of the and I gave it a word. In Consulta, we call it anditions. So if I want to add something, I call it, can I add an andition? And we refrain from what we call or notions. There's a classic one. I heard you, but. That's an or notion. I listened to you. That's a whole different. Can I add an andition? Can you see the possibility of positive outcome in the latter? All right. Let's go to the last bit of this, and then we can have questions and discussion, is the 3 leadership contributions that I really, really love. The first one is, and I've quoted him already, Jim Collins. Fantastic book to read, Good to Great. I've done many talks on Jim Collins' work. What I love about his work is that he aligns his work with leadership. In his particular view, he talks about a level 5 leadership. And I want to quote from that so you can understand that these things are actually coming together. It says, builds enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. It is not about the leader and about the fact that you are always the hero. As a matter of fact, you are what Simon Sinek says, leaders eat last. That level of humility. He talks about this breakthrough cycle. It starts off with disciplined people, and that's the reason where I started discovering that leadership and management in a polarity without the managerial discipline, because I'm a natural leader. I love the vision. I'm always head in the clouds. I'm always dreaming. I'm always innovating. Krista knows this, but once I've actually said to the guys, I'm going to go on a 6-month sabbatical. I'm going to get the newest stuff in the world because we stopped innovating. And the guys agreed on it, and we made the strategic plans, and I even had some naval commanders there. We used the book of Michael Abrasov, It's Your Ship. And I said to them, here's the Consulta ship. You steer it, you go with it. Luckily, in hindsight, 6 months, I didn't go. 6 months down the line, I looked back, and they were all standing on the shore. Nobody followed. Because I ran too fast. I was way too fast. Way too far. They didn't understand. I didn't make myself clear. I had to go all the way. Humble pie. Come on, let's just redo this thing. Let's just restate it. Let's just relaunch it. And we did. And it then worked. But it was slow, painstaking, very resilient. First who, then what. So it's all about starting with leadership. Those are the 2 slides that I want to share with you. This is an interesting piece of work that you all know. You've done lots of work on Patrick Lencioni on the advantage. So maybe you have seen this little video clip. So I'm just going to play this one video clip because one contribution that Patrick Lencioni makes is the fact, and maybe you haven't seen that and haven't looked at that angle, is that if I take building a cohesive leadership team, and then there's three aspects that he spends around a word that he calls clarity. It's as if he's saying to us that clarity is very difficult. So you need to be clear, create clarity. We need to over-communicate it, we need to be clear. And then he says, reinforce clarity. Are we clear? And the first part is interesting. I want to show you that the first part is about the foundation of his pyramid is the T word, trust. So there's two components that I would like to take out of the advantage. It's trust and clarity. Two very challenging leadership concepts.
Every organization I work with has enough domain expertise, intelligence, and knowledge to be wildly successful. However, very few of them tap into all of that knowledge, domain expertise, and experience because they're not healthy, because of dysfunction and politics and confusion. Samuel Johnson, the great writer, had a great quote once. He said, people need to be reminded more than they need to be instructed.
Okay, can you hear what he's just said? He talks about health, and healthy organizations is that pyramid we're going to quickly review. And then he talks about reminding. What is reminding other than creating clarity? So it actually dawned on me in the last 2 years, and I've, when I read, Krista knows, that's my other addiction, is I love reading. I probably read about 20 books a month because I really read a lot. I'm not finishing all of them. They're in different stages, but some of them I read quickly because I can speed read. So if I need to read a book between now and tomorrow, I will do so. I will not necessarily retain all the knowledge, but it's to actually just get the gist of it. And in this reading of his book, and I probably have gone through it now for 4 or 5 times, this is what I discovered. Trust and clarity. Remind, repeat, repeat, remind, repeat, repeat. Okay. So there's that famous red cross, and there it is at the bottom in his pyramid, says trust. So we need to therefore quickly look into trust. I've touched on that in terms of Stephen Covey's work. So I'm just going to take through this. I love this one. This is very millennial. I had to ask my kids to get me this one. Keep calm and put trust in the gap. Do you know how difficult this is? Incredibly difficult. Someone that is late for a meeting. Now let me tell you a personal example. I was teaching at the University of Pretoria. I was in the GW, Human Sciences building, 14th floor. So one day I was actually occupied in my work, and I realized, oops, it's time to go and lecture, and it was 5 minutes. Now, you cannot do that in the GW. Because when you get to the 14th floor elevator, you'll probably stand there for 10 minutes just to get down to the actual teaching, lecturing halls. So needless to say, I was late. And the university students had a system they called, it's like a period of time that they allow you to be late, and then they massa. Means that they leave. So they've massad on me because I was late about 5 minutes. So the next time, I was on time, and I gave them a little bit of peace of mind. I said, you don't do that with me. Guess what happened the third time? I got stuck in Sunny Park in an elevator. Again, elevators are not my thing. And this was a true story. But this time I wasn't late. I missed the whole class. Apparently the poor kids were sitting there for 20 minutes. Trust. If it would have happened again, look, I would have lost all credibility. Can you see putting trust in the gap is a difficult thing for humans? So maybe there's a couple of things that we can do there. Speed of Trust, fantastic book to read. It's an easy book to read. There's lots of material. Go onto the Franklin Covey website. You can actually get a lot of resources on there. So I'm going to just introduce Stephen Covey in terms of his approach to trust.
One time I hired a guide to take me fly fishing. While we were fishing, he asked me, "What do you see?" I see a beautiful river. Do you see any fish? No. Then he told me to put on a pair of polarized sunglasses. Suddenly, everything looked dramatically different. I could see through the water, and I could see fish, a lot of fish. Suddenly, I saw enormous possibilities that I had not seen before. The fish were there all along, but until I put on the glasses, they were hidden.
Here's a challenge. He's taken Polaroid glasses and he can watch into the river and he sees the fishes right now. Did he speak about the fishes will be there tomorrow? He didn't. He just talks about the now. Just before he's put on the glasses, the history, there's no signs. I know I couldn't see any fishes, but you know what? He's there with his fishing gear. He's optimistic that he's going to catch a fish. Imagine if he would put on the Polaroid glasses and there were no fishes. Would it be sane to keep on standing there? You know, you're wasting time. There's no fish here. Leave. And I think this is the simple way that I would like to share with you how we can approach trust. Maybe sometimes we make it too academic and too complex. It's the degree to which we need to find the Polaroid glass for now to check the now. Don't try to find the crystal ball of tomorrow. Because that's where things go wrong. Is we try to look in the crystal ball of tomorrow, then we predict, then it doesn't happen, and then it breaks trust. That's where I think really the problem comes from. And the reality is this. Do you realize that trust consists of two components? It's a character component, and Krista knows this. She's actually used her own way of the under the water, the iceberg principle or the hippopotamus, what you can't see. The character component consists of integrity and intent. Now, this is fascinating stuff to me. If intent is below the surface, and intent is all about clarity, can you see the link between trust and clarity? We created a culture in Consulta that we have a language that we are saying we restate intent almost every minute. It becomes a way of speaking. I'm going to teach you that just now. So why do we do that? Because intent is hidden from us. I don't know what's your intent unless I speak about that. I give you the opportunity to speak to me about it. Then it will be uncovered. And you know what? The moment that there's clarity, there's no reason for distrust. The moment that integrity is there, I can trust you because you have integrity. Those are the two absolutes of trust. If you don't have that in terms of the character component, very difficult to move to the top part. But a mafia boss that is the most horrible person can have a lot of integrity. He will steal every time. Promise you, he will steal from you. And his intent is quite clear. I'm going to steal from you. Is that character? That's not what we mean. It's character in that positive sense. And then we move on to the competence, and I'm not going to go into that. But here's a couple of myths. When we talk about trust, leaders sometimes say, this is the soft, willy stuff, the bunny huggers, the tree huggers, because the myth is that trust is soft. You're a softie. You're not a disciplined manager. You're not a hard, specific, successful manager if you trust too much. Trust is slow. Trust is built solely on integrity. Trusting people is too risky. Trust is established one person at a time. You need to do it one by one. These are all myths. Let's quickly go to some of the realities. The reality is trust is hard. It's real, and it's very measurable. You can actually measure it. Nothing is as fast as the speed of trust. Do you know why it takes longer for things to happen? It's because of trust. Because we have to redo stuff. I didn't understand your clarity. I didn't understand your intent. How many times have you been to a planning meeting and everyone is absolutely clear what to do? 2 months down the line, the leader says, okay, let's just check the progress. So let's just see whether everyone is still online with this program. And then you will get the following. I think we just need to revisit that particular aspect because I wasn't clear about it. Duh. It's again the clarity issue. All right. Trust is a function of both character and competence. We spoke about that. Not trusting people is a greater risk than trusting people. I made a quote this weekend, which I'm still thinking about what it's actually meaning. And I said the following: a foolish optimist will always be more happy than an inherently negative person. Now, these are two extremes, foolish optimist than an inherently negative person, those poisonous, toxic people that's always negative. A toxic person can never be positive and therefore would not be happy. But a foolish optimist, even if he's sometimes wrong, there's happiness. I'm not saying that you need to be a foolish optimist, but it's certainly saying that not trusting people is a greater risk. Try it. Invest in trust. Establishing trust with a one establishes trust with a many. And that's difficult to do. I can maybe trust one, but do I trust the group? Do I trust my team? Because if I start to look at the different members of the team, I trust that one a little bit more than the other. And then immediately division sets in. All right, so let's quickly look at this. Low trust, speed goes down, and cost goes up. That's a fact. We can calculate that in organizations. As a matter of fact, you can call that a trust tax. Whereas if you look at the other way, when trust is high, things are quicker and costs are lower, which means there's a trust dividend. It's almost as if there's nothing in between for us. There's a trust tax, there's a trust dividend. So how do we make this real? So let me show you a practical example. So even if this is the only thing that I can leave with you today, is an example of a practice that we practice in Consulta. On every meeting, we have an intent officer, a clarity officer, we've sometimes called it. An appointed person that needs to ensure that we don't leave here if we've rechecked the clarity, we've rechecked the intent. Does it always work? Did it improve? Yes, it did. And the process works like this. This comes from Stephen Bungay, The Art of Action. So this guy knows about action and implementation. He starts off with the first step that he says, state your intent verbally. Talk it out. Even if you speak it out loud, doesn't mean that it's intended for other people. It's my intent. You know how they do this in the army? When you're a torpedo charger, what do? They say, loading torpedo, corporal. And he loads the torpedo. Why does he speak out the command? So that his commander can hear, I'm loading the torpedo, I shouldn't mess around now. There's some dangerous ammunition here. And we don't do that in management. We are very individualized and we don't speak the intent. So that's the first one. Then comes a massive disappointment. You have to do step 2. Always. Try again, this time in context. You have to restate that intent, this time putting it into context and saying, this is why this is my intent. It doesn't stop there. There's 3 more steps. Then you need to set your measure. Now it becomes a little bit more difficult. I've declared my intent, I've put it into context, and I said, you can measure me this way. So when I've achieved this particular point of behavior or milestone, then you can tell me, okay, you've achieved it. Measure. 4th, define the task implied, the behaviors to achieve that measure. And the last one, quite easy. No, it's not. Define the boundaries, because there's always a boundary. In Consulta, we have only 2 rules. Is that possible in a company? I think it is. The 2 rules are this: reputational damage outside in the market, and reputational damage amongst our staff. That's all. If you start doing stoep Skinner and stoep Prikes and all sorts of other nonsense, you're damaging the reputational risk, you're damaging the trust, you're making this company slower, you're costing us money. It's a trust tax. Find yourself another place. This is not a place for you to work with. If you do some stupid stuff and we have reputational damage at our client, we're going to seriously talk about it. Those are the boundaries. That's like a sandpit. You know, you can build any castle in the sandpit, but just don't throw each other with sand. Don't steal the other kids' grafies and virkies. Okay? So the third one, turn the ship around. This is my personal favorite. I had to do this at a stage where Consulta was in real trouble. It was in 2012, worst ever year. Luckily, I found this book after the Abrasoff book, and it's called Turn the Ship Around. And he talks about the 3 C's. And lo and behold, what is the number 1 C there? Clarity. 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 And he says, this guy is really controversial. This guy is the naval commander of a nuclear submarine that was given command of that nuclear submarine when he was first given command of a normal, conventional submarine that he studied the manual of 600 pages. And then 3 weeks before they sail, they say, hang on, change of plans. You go to the nuclear submarine. Did he have any knowledge of how to manage a nuclear submarine? None whatsoever. So what was he forced to do? Could he command and conquer? Could he command the nuclear submarine? No.
Captain should authorize. You got a couple nukes in your group, they'll tell you it's true. Captain authorize, submerge the ship, get underway, start up the reactor, shut down the reactor, connect to shore power, divorce from shore power. On and on, break production, on and on and on. Pages of these things. I just refused to give those orders. What we replaced it with was intent. Instead of giving...
Ta-da, intent. Now what is fascinating to me is that these 3 great authors are coming from vastly different perspectives. And you know what? They come to the same Rome. Many paths leading to the same Rome. The new, let's call it modern way of thinking of servant leadership. This is scary stuff. Let me show you what he says, that control mechanism. The very first one, I'm just going to be quick about this. Find the genetic code for control and rewrite it. Throw it away. Rewrite it. Give control away. Now that is scary, more scary than Stephen King's worst possible book. Tell a manager they need to give control away. They say to you, you're mad. That's not what managers are all about. Managers are about control. We teach them in the MBA that part of the managerial discipline is control. We teach them how to control. But up, from bottom up, control is always better than top down control. Because top down control becomes policing. Bottom up control becomes informing. All right. Now, again, it's easier said than done. I promise you, we've tried these things. It's painful. It's difficult. It doesn't always work. So therefore, I don't want to romanticize it. So there's a couple of things that I just want to do. But have a look at number 4. So the I intend to is the becoming a practice. We've culturally have fixed that into our DNA. It becomes the way that we speak in Consulta. As a matter of fact, when people come into my office, probably one of their first words would be, I intend to. And then an interesting one is, I want to show you this one, take deliberate action. Number 3 there, don't brief, certify. When someone comes to my office and says, Adre, can I have permission to do so? I immediately say no. I don't even listen to what you want. Why would I do that? Because I didn't appoint you to come and ask me for permission. I appointed you for your brains, not to follow orders. So therefore, if you come to me and say, I intend to do the following, do you agree? Then I certify that. Can you fail a certification? Oh, hell yes. I've many times sent people back and said, listen, that's been tried. Go and think again. It will not work. I don't refuse permission. Can you see where I'm going with this? It is a cultural practice that is real. It's not la-la land stuff that's up in the air and we motivate people and then they go back to the old ways of doing. Last one, clarity. Number 3, build trust. So it's as if these things are really so integrated and intermingled that I cannot take it apart. Trust and clarity. You guys in Africa is in a massive change process right now, as I understand. It's 4 businesses. It's a new way of doing things. Is that easy? No, it's not easy. It's new, and therefore it's unknown territory. We have to break new ground. And the resistance to change will be there. It is there, most probably. But when change happens, they say that change only happens in what we call liminal space. Liminal is actually coming from the language of Latin that says threshold. You need to walk through a door of exit, which means you need to exit. You cannot do this following. Let's say there's the future. You know what most people do? How they walk to the future? Do they walk this way? How do they walk? This way. Now you can try this. Maybe a program to run. For a week you announce everyone needs to walk backwards. It's going to be chaos. Probably going to be very humoristic. But it's also going to be dangerous. You just need to check your occupational hazard policies. Because that's not the way that we do things. But yes, that's the way that we do things when we look at the future. But exit means that we need to separate ourselves from the existing. But then there's something wrong. We think that separation immediately means meeting to the new. There's something in between, and this is the new work they call liminal. That space of now. Allow yourself to change in the now. Ask yourself, what does it mean to be for businesses? What does it mean for me right now? What do I need to do today to adhere to that new? Let me give you a practical example, and with that I'm ending off. It's a joyous story. Saturday morning. Now, Krista knows my wife. She's a very passionate person. So obviously, Megan, marriage, royals. So she organizes this whole party, She dresses up like royalty, and it's a whole party, She's as if she's there. She just loves it, princes and kings and whatever else. And I play along. I love it, I love how she's passionate about this. So here comes my son and my daughter-in-law, and they came in, and because they were also invited. And they came in with a tray of Starbucks coffee. Now, what do they do on Starbucks coffee? They write the names on it. You know what? That's one of the secrets of Starbucks coffee's customer experience, is the fact that there's personalization. It's my coffee. It's Adre's coffee. So Taylor came to me, and she gave the cup of my favorite coffee, and I just glanced looking for Adre, and on the side of the cup, it says, Grandpa. That's all. What does it mean? They're expecting. They're expecting. Now, what is interesting, that afternoon I sat with him, and he said to me, Dad, I'm extremely worried. I'm fearful as hell, because I don't know how to be a dad. Have you been trained? Have you been told? Have you received a certificate? Okay, now you're ready to be a dad. That's how life works. You don't get a certificate to go to new for businesses, but you need to exit out of being a non-dad. Enjoy the now. I said to him, listen, the only thing that I can give you is good advice. Enjoy this moment. Enjoy the expecting period of 9 months. Every minute, every second of it. And then you need to step into it. You need to become a dad. You need to be a dad. You cannot be a reluctant dad. Impossible. So I'm ending off with a great quote from Pamela Weiss. You probably heard it before. It says, if you want to transform an organization, it's not about changing systems and processes so much as changing the hearts and the minds of people. And guys, it sounds easy, but you know what? People are, each and every one of them is an individual. I can sit here and I can be the most motivational speaker, and I can work you up in a frenzy, and we storm out here, we're now going to attack the enemy. And I look around and there's only 5 of us storming. Because the others are still reluctant, still not totally buying into this. Some are to wait and see, let them do it and then I'll do it. Let's see if it works, then I'll follow. So changing the hearts and minds of people is not easy if you do not get the articulation of the intent and the clarity. So what do we do? Very easy tip that I would like to give you. Whenever you plan something new and you've agreed on something, do not tell the guys, this is my intent. Throw it to your group and say, just bounce back your intent to me. Now, there might be a risk that they will give you the politically correct answer. They would give you the answer that you would like to hear. But listen carefully. I'm wearing hearing aids and I had to listen differently. My wife used to say to me, there's a huge difference between hearing and listening. So listen carefully to them, and in the listening, try to pick up whether they have the same version of your the agreed clarity than yours. Last but not least, it means that if there's 5 people, that's my team, and you've restated your clarity, your version of that, you stated yours, you stated yours, you stated yours, you stated yours. The best answer consists in the combination of all 5 and not in only one of them. So the degree to which I can synergize the team will give me the best probability that this intent will happen. And that's what I live by. That's the principles that I live by. So don't make it too complex. Enjoy leadership. It is not necessarily always romantic. As a matter of fact, leadership is not for sissies. It is very often romanticized and Hollywoodized, whatever you want to call it. It's a responsibility because you work with people. You now become responsible for people. In the past, you were responsible for your job. So now you're a manager of people. You're not a manager of things. You're a manager of people, therefore a leader. I thank you for allowing me to share this with you. Please have, I think there's 5 or so minutes left in terms of the 2 hours. If there's some comments or inputs, I've enjoyed the group, especially the music exercise. So maybe you can try that. I can tell you the little outcome in our office was I only heard about our music debate too late. And it created quite a bit of a conflict because the one guy that was trying to motivate these people is a Metallica supporter. So every morning at about 8 o'clock, he would, it's like killing a cat. And the people started moaning about it. Then he changed the type of music, and then he started playing opera. I'm talking about Pavarotti's, the most heavy type of stuff. Then they moaned about it. Then he started playing ballads. And people still moan about it. Ultimately, it led to a point where people said, listen, now you're not allowed to play music anymore. Winners, losers. What is now the end outcome? We have certain times when you can actually play a bit of music. And if you don't like the music, there's a space that you can go to and go and quietly work because we've created the office in such a way. So it means that there's coexistence for both groups of this. And the morale and the motivation and everything is up. So there was a solution to this without creating a rule. I'm in close contact with Krista, and she often shares with me the journey that you guys are on. And I'm really impressed by Africa, and I really wish you guys a prosperous future. Remember the Polarities of now. All right, not a crystal ball of tomorrow. And I think then it will go well with you. Then you don't fret too much about the future. I thank you.